So, my name is Bob Barker. I'm a managing partner at BarkerGilmore, and thanks for joining us today. Our mission as a company is to help companies build, develop, and optimize their legal and compliance department. And today's webinar is about professional development and helping you as you look towards improving the performance in your organization. And the topic today is organizing your legal department and determining the optimal structure. We get many questions. I talk to many general counsel who are looking to help figure out how they can be more effective as an organization that's supporting the clients and just the overall functioning of the organization. And we have some great speakers today that will be touching on this topic. We also have upcoming webinars. We have them on a monthly basis. Next month is going to be on how to lead people who were once your peers. So another interesting topic. We also have a library of previously recorded webinars that's available on our website. And today's presentation will be recorded, it is being recorded, and the video will be available as well as an audio recording that you can download from the website. And that'll be up on the site in probably about 3 weeks. And we'll let you know via email once that everything is uploaded. If you can go to the Q&A section, we encourage you to submit questions today. At the bottom of the Zoom application, you'll see the Q&A. Just type that, click on that, and you can type your question. There's an opportunity for you to view what other questions have been submitted already. And if you have the same type of question, the same question basically, you can give a thumbs up. And what that'll do is that'll raise the question to the top of the queue. And so today's speakers will know that is a question that is of high interest to everyone. We'll do our best to answer questions, all the questions by the end of the day. And there's also a chat feature. It's next to the Q&A. And if you have any technical issues, what have you, that's what the chat feature is for. At this point, let me turn it over to Audrey.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm so honored to have Peter Gans and A.B. Cruz join me today on this webinar. And in a minute, they'll introduce themselves. We're going to do that very briefly because you can look us up for more detail on the BarkerGilmore website. Again, I'm Audrey Rubin. I am a former general counsel and also more recently a former chief operating officer of a global law department. It was the Aon Law Department. So I bring with us the general counsel purchaser experience as well as the provider of services. And for today's purposes, legal operations and how organizations should be structured. Peter, you want to do a 1 minute on yourself?
Sure, be delighted. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Peter Gans. And prior to becoming a senior advisor with BarkerGilmore earlier this year, I retired in January as general counsel of Ashland Global Holdings, a specialty chemical company. And prior to that, I was general counsel of 2 other global companies of different sizes. And currently, I'm actually part-time being general counsel of a special purpose acquisition corporation, which is a whole different kind of world. So looking forward to talking with everyone about different aspects of running and setting up legal departments.
How about you, AB?
Yeah, well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, to everyone. Glad we could convene here. I guess what I bring to the table is much like my colleagues here is experience as a chief legal officer / GC for several different companies, both public and private. across several different industries, media and entertainment, financial services, biotech, pharma. And if you can see from my screen, I also bring a wealth of 37 years in military uniform to the table. So if we get into military discussions during this conversation, I'm happy to participate in those. But otherwise, we're going to be talking about optimizing your legal function structure. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. So let's get into it. I'll tell you what the goal of today's hour is going to be. We want to address, obviously, optimization of the legal structure in your organization, but we're going to try to do both large and small law departments, US based as well as international. And then we're also going to spend some time talking about the stage of the company and how that might impact the law department structure. In other words, would it be different if the company was about to go public? Would it be different if there was a SPAC coming up or some outside investment? Or would it be different, and what would you do if your company was a startup, having just gone through one of those transactions or a true startup? So let's start. I'm going to ask Peter to start with. Peter, in your experience, when you are running a large corporate law department, how do you like to organize things? Is it by region? Is it by specialty? Why don't you give us an overview of the best way that you think it is to organize a large international law department?
Well, I hate to start. I said I wouldn't start with the typical lawyer answer of it depends. So I won't say that, even though I think it's true. I think that, a couple of principles in general. I think that you want to make sure you have connectivity as a unified group. I think it's very important that the law department of a corporation act as a single entity. I mean, you are practicing law. I think it's important. You're not a law firm. It's part of the business, but you are practicing law, and you need to always recognize that. So you need to have that unity. That said, in terms of the regional, international versus domestic, I think it's one of the hardest things to get right, frankly, because I think it's a hard thing to get right for the business, for the company. So first thing I would say is, it seems logical to do on a regional basis. And frankly, that's the most typical way I've done it, on a regional basis. That said, I think more recently, as companies have evolved, where their business lines are seen as more global as they're structured. And it's not foreign operations, they're not outposts of a domestically run organization. I really think you have to give serious thought to not having leadership centralized in the US and having regional heads, but to actually have your legal function mirror your corporation's function. So while I would start on a regional basis, I would be looking to expand that, where you might have leaders in the regions having more global responsibility outside of their regions and not centralizing all of that in the US.
What about you, AB? What do you think?
Well, Peter was afraid to say it, but I will say it. It really does depend on so many different factors. Audrey, you mentioned some in your intro. I mean, everything from the stage of the company, i.e. maturity, size, industry, its financial situation, type of organization, public, private, and then really what the needs, issues, demands are at hand for the company and for the legal function. Not to mention the existing structures that you have in place. Sometimes it's a set table by the time you get in there as GC. And then of course, time horizons, near term, short term, or longer term, and then of course resources. So and C-suite expectations, not to mention who you have as outside counsel. But a lot of what Peter said is right. I think what I've seen, what I saw is, if you're talking about an international thing, it certainly makes sense that there's regional pieces to that, given the regulatory schemes of the various places, countries that you're operating in. But I will say that it's also, I also think it's important to make sure that you're aligned in a constructive, a creative way to the businesses that you support. And a lot of companies report along business segments, and it makes it often makes sense to make sure that there's alignment in that regard. I will say that there's also an opportunity where you maybe have a little bit of a hybrid, depending on your situation. If there are some nuanced areas of law that are confined to a particular region or country, that might change your thinking in terms of optimizing the legal support that is provided to address those nuanced or specific demands or needs of whatever part of the business it is.
I think another thing I would add, Audrey, just is that I think it's also important, particularly now, is to think about the people you have in those spots, those senior legal spots, particularly overseas, that, when you have strong players and, we have the opportunity to develop people. We're not as rigid in terms of, as lawyers and legal departments, that people have to fit in a specific box. But I really think it's incumbent upon the GC in today's modern corporation to look to develop those international lawyers and give them opportunities outside of those regions, because that's the way modern corporations today have to look in terms of their business. And we're a step behind if we look at our international lawyers as really being just reflective of their particular regions. I think it's important these days. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I have two follow-up questions here. And the first one's actually for AB. We've hit on one of the issues here, which is aligning the law department to the various lines of business. What do you think about law departments that literally have their lawyers reporting into a line of business?
I've certainly seen that, experienced that firsthand. And I just remember having meetings in meeting with our board, and they kind of wanted for me to opine on the entire law department. And so I'm not necessarily against having lawyers report up through their business chains, but there has to be at least a dotted line in reporting and evaluation of lawyers' work. But ultimately, sitting at the board table, having to present to them, I always like to give them the entire picture. So there has to be a level of connectivity in kind of real time or near real time, so that you have visibility. Plus, the myriad of other things that you worry about, especially as a public company GC, in terms of liability, risk, and the like. And so when I did walk into a situation, in fact, it was my first GC role, where we had lawyers reporting up solely to the business, we changed that model quite quickly. I had the support of my CEO in order to make that change. So we had better visibility. And frankly, part of the problem was under the model that I walked into was legal costs were going through the roof, in terms of, because they were also hiring their outside counsel on a unilateral basis. And obviously, as a new GC, that was a difficult thing to get my arms around.
Yeah, I too believe that only the law department, a unified law department, should be hiring outside counsel, with very rare exceptions. But so we can talk about that too. But I'm wondering, we got a question from somebody in the audience, and I'd like to raise it with you. And Peter, you can start. What advice would you give a large but U.S. company that is now thinking of expanding internationally? Do you now keep the what I'll call the areas of concentration? So, for example, you have a matrix where you have, the litigation people, the corporate M&A people, the intellectual property people that oversee the world? Or what do you recommend a company that's expanding internationally do in terms of structuring its law department?
Well, I do think, and going to your prior question, it's related. I think you need to have that unified department, at least internally, in terms of responsibility. In front of the curtain to the business units, they can have lawyers who are specialized in their group sit around their table, but in terms of reporting, in terms of hiring, I really think that has to be centralized. And I think it impacts this too. As you expand overseas, where you want to have, particularly as you're just expanding, you do want to have local knowledge on the commercial side, critical. But I do like having the specialty lawyers, whether it's environmental, whether it's technology, litigation to some extent. I like to have that centralized in the sense that there is somebody who has overall responsibility for a corporation, because your corporation is one entity. As AB was saying, when you're in the boardroom, the board wants to know what's happening in our corporation. They're not, you can't tell them, well, I don't know, I'm just the general counsel for the corporate entity. I'll have to check in the regions, or you need to know what's going on, because that's your responsibility. So for those key specialties, I like there to be some reporting up through an individual who then maybe reports to me or to someone else. And that doesn't mean there aren't in the regions people with a lot of responsibility as you expand, but I do like to see that connectivity up to the center, and the center ultimately is the general counsel. So, depending on your personnel, you find that person. And again, going to my earlier comment, it doesn't mean that person has to be in the US. That person can be in Europe or China or Latin America or somewhere else.
Would your answer be the same if it was a small US-based company that wasn't thinking of expanding, or even a large but only US based company? So for example, in a US only organization, or we'll just say US and Canada only organization, do you like to have it unified with subject matter expertise or business line expertise, or regional within the US expertise? What do you think, AB?
Well, and I want to make sure we answered the first initial question, or at least I want to provide some insight, because I think if I read the question right, it was about a US based or a US only company, or let's say North America company that's expanding. What do you do short term, long term in terms of building out in an international component? I think I got that right. To the extent that's the question, that I'll provide at least some insight based on my experience. If your company wants to go gangbusters internationally, and it's moving quickly in that regard, and thinking about, for instance, overseas acquisition or some sort of, or even a partnership or some relationship with an international entity, and you don't have boots on the ground, to use a military phrase, and you need to get comfortable really fast as the GC, guess what? Near term, you're reaching out to outside counsel, and in terms of who they have relationships with, whatever region it is, whether it's China, whether it's EU, to build up that desired instant expertise to help guide you through sometimes in my case, in a particular case that I'm thinking of, something I knew very little about. Longer term, once you've got that base and you've got your arms around it, you kind of know what your company plans to do internationally, then you can start shaping and tailoring that in-house legal expertise overseas. And by then, in our case, it worked out, quite well. In that couple of the acquisitions we had, there were already lawyers in place, at least a couple of them, and that we built relationships on the recruiting side so that we could build up that expertise. So I hope that answers the question that was asked earlier. And Audrey, is there something else that you wanted to add to that or ask me?
No, that's a great one. I'm going to throw in a little tip for the audience members, and then we'll go on to the smaller or the US-based organizations. The tip is you can now negotiate flat fees around the world or preset fees with these large law firms around the world. And I found that most effective, not only because I knew what my fees were going to be, but especially with larger organizations, it was getting to the point where, I'd have to call the partner in the UK, who would then call the partner in Germany to see what they could do in terms of fees for a particular matter, and so on and so forth. And I got tired of that. And I said, look, we'll give you this kind of business, this portfolio of business, but I don't want to deal with three different, partners in three different countries coming up with their own fee. And I don't want to call all three of them. So we're going to pick one relationship partner and I'm going to get one fee right now. Tell me what it is for all over the world. And that just saved a tremendous amount of effort. Just a little tip. Peter.
No, I was going to say and having had that experience as well of expanding into, new regions overseas, we all have that, and the like. Another caution is, we all have these firms that we have these relationships with, particularly in the U.S. And every big firm thinks it can do everything everywhere for everybody, and you have to be careful about that as you expand. That they really have the expertise in the particular region. And the industry in that region that you're pushing in, and you may have to think outside of your normal list of firms, and it may be a firm you haven't heard of because it's somebody who is strong. It's just an extension of in the U.S. There may be a region or an area that you need somebody you haven't heard of, and your big firm thinks it can do it, but they can't. And particularly when you're expanding overseas, you really need that local expertise. And it may be somebody that you don't deal with today.
Good point. Good point. We should touch on for just a minute, and then we are getting a number of other questions we should answer. We should touch on for a minute, if you have a North America only organization of several employees, several lawyers, do you structure it regionally? Do you structure it per business line, or do you structure it per subject matter expertise? What do you think? Maybe.
Well, I guess I'm going to respond with I guess it kind of depends on so many different things. I don't know if there's a particular scenario you want to present, but North America, my experience with a company that was pretty much North America thing, it was very much centralized, and that seemed to work well. I did step into that situation with really not having a lot of in-house talent, i.e. the headcount was low, and frankly, it took some time to convince my colleagues in the C-suite that we should even expand, that we should expand the headcount in the legal way. We, in this case, aligned around our businesses, and it certainly wasn't regional per se, but we did have at our major locations. The good thing that we had is that we had at least one or two lawyers at each of the sites, and so we had presence. Legal had a presence at in this case, it was two manufacturing sites, and then headquarters, and then we had a later acquisition on the West Coast, and so that worked out quite well. So we had boots on the ground on all the major locations. They were aligned. Our organization was aligned pretty much along businesses. But then there, of course, the specialty areas like IP and litigation, that was something more centralized that we would farm out as needed to the various businesses or the various sites.
Peter, what's your opinion on this subject?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends both on the structure of the company as well as the athletes you have on the field in your department. And to AB's point, you may have to add, and sometimes you have to subtract, but that's a harder issue. But you need to know who you have and where you can put them. But I've always liked to have both domestically, and my businesses were all very international, so you had that matrix as well, but have really strong commercial generalists. Now, I do like them reporting up through the general counsel's office, not separately in the businesses, but as far as the business is concerned, they know who to pick up the phone in the first instance to call, and have very strong commercial lawyers who the businesses see as their lawyer. And then behind the curtain, you have your specialists and you have your collaboration among people. So I always like that, whether it's domestic or international. And then you tie it back through and make sure that everybody is operating as one unit, particularly with those specialist lawyers. But I do always like to have lead commercial lawyers. And like I said, I don't like each business has its own mini general counsel, but somebody who is their commercial lawyer, who sits at the table, who works with them, whether it's domestic or international.
Thank you. One other observation about unifying the operation, at least in terms of an org structure, you can unify the budget that way too. And therefore, if one country or one area overspends, you can have what the other sections or regions or groups, if they're underspending, your entire legal budget still comes out where it's supposed to come out. So I found that extremely helpful if you can consolidate the budgets and still make people responsible for their region or their area, the leaders of those areas or regions. But at the end of the day, it's one consolidated budget, which gives you quite a bit more flexibility, I have found. One of the questions here is, what metrics do you find most helpful to provide to the board and the C-suite about the law department's progress and achievements? And I would love to answer that, but I think your best bet is to listen to or watch a webinar that we did a few months ago on corporate law department KPIs and metrics, which will be much richer than taking time up today. So I'm going to kind of defer that one to the existing webinar in the BarkerGilmore library. What do you do about a company that is small or a portfolio company and maybe about to go public or looking for investors? How do you organize a smaller organization in that posture? Peter, why don't you start?
That's not only interesting, that's a fun area to get into. It's good to be it's fun to be a general counsel when you're looking at those issues, because you sometimes you start with a blank sheet and you start figuring it out. I think it also depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to spin out a division from a public company, which I've done, it's one set of goals. If you're trying to take an entity public, another set of goals. So I think it's a much longer conversation, but in short, I think a couple of things you have to really think about. Those good lawyers who are good within a commercial structure, supporting a business, may not be the kind of lawyer to take it public or to be, the general counsel of even a private company that's spun out. You need to really think about skill set. And those are some of the tough decisions, some tough conversations, but it's incumbent upon you as the general counsel to really think about that. There are really good lawyers who aren't going to be good general counsel.
When do you make that decision? Do you do it before the restructuring, after the restructuring, or IPO? When do you make that decision?
I think you have to absolutely do it before. I think you absolutely have to do it before, because that would be a failure on your part. I think if you didn't work that and advise the board, and that's where general counsel of an entity earns his or her pay, is to really have those discussions. But when you're looking for that public company or even an independent private company general counsel, you need to make those decisions. The other thing to think about is, who are the support lawyers? I mean, when you have if you're public, certainly. If you have public debt, even if you're remaining private, but you're going into the public debt markets, do you have that expertise on securities filings, on disclosure, even on how to deal with investors? And you may not have that internally, and you can fill the gap with outside lawyers, but ultimately you want to have internal expertise. So you have to think about that. It's not just the general counsel, but it's also do you have those specialty lawyers internally who can support the general counsel in that new regime, whether it's being public or whether it's being a spun out private company or whether it's being private company that is now taking on public debt.
AB, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Peter said. If you're a small company, chances are your legal department, I would guess, is going to be pretty small and frankly limited in its capacity. And if you're thinking about or going public, whether it be through IPO or maybe, as Peter mentioned, through the special purpose acquisition way, the SPACs. Bottom line is that, yeah, as Peter said, expertise, having the right expertise, going public, he mentioned it, but just the SEC disclosure rules that all of a sudden, day one become your responsibility. You've got to have something in place, and let's be honest. Depending on where you are on that timeline in terms of transitioning from private to public, if it's way early, you can build towards that. If it's happening, tomorrow, then you're going to have to find that expertise probably through outside counsel. One big advice I have for those companies that have, are private companies that have done well, maybe started off as a mom and pop shop that have done very successful and become a target or to go public or to move from private to public. One thing I would suggest, having been in one of those situations, is, and if you're trying to attract private equity or what have you, get your house in order. The things that lawyers or GCs touch or should be minding, all of a sudden, all those little things that are probably on your wish list. Oh, I'll get to that when I have time. Are probably the things that you need to make sure. So in the end, as I put it, your stuff's in one sock when you're being looked at. Maybe being acquired or wanting to, again, move into the public company realm. The good news is that a lot of private companies now are practicing the best practices of what's required of public companies. But that, having learned some tough lessons early on, as really with a small legal function when I was a deputy general counsel, and moving from private to public, was I wish we had more time to get stuff in order so that the process of transition would have been much smoother.
Well, here's kind of a complicated question that we got from the audience. It has to do with convincing the C-suite that you need to hire. And I'm going to roll another question into that, which is, if you are a startup company, like you're the first lawyer there. I have done this twice, actually. Peter, you may have done this too. I'm not sure. I've done it twice. And now what do you do? Where do you grow first? How do you convince people that you need to hire? You're brand new, and you might be getting yourself in shape to do some bigger and better things. How do you structure the organization and convince the C-suite that you need to hire in that situation or in a larger law department? How do you convince them that more assistance is needed? And I'm going to start this off with my own answer, and then I'm going to turn it over to you to again say that the metrics are critical here. Everybody likes metrics. Lawyers sometimes aren't used to putting metrics together, but you have to show that it's more cost effective to have somebody in-house, You have to show that you're going to reduce risk by bringing somebody in-house, either because you're not passing it off to various law firms or because the in-house person really truly knows the business and the weaknesses and the strengths of the business. But you do have to prove the metrics, why it's better to hire than to keep going outside. And in my experience, that is true pretty much for even a startup one-person law department. What do you think, AB?
So to convince your C-suite, obviously the ideal situation is you as GC, chief legal officer, get to, call the shots in terms of what your team looks like. Well, there, as we highlighted at the outset, there's a lot of factors. Head count or having a ceiling is often always part of the equation, i.e., you don't have room to hire. And so you have to, if you really firmly believe that you want to transition, for instance, certain expertise from that's traditionally been or historically been on sitting on the outside counsel's docket and moving it in-house, well, you got to do some work, right? You got to convince the C-suite that it's for financial reasons, for risk reasons, it's the way to go. And this was, again, through experience. One thing that I had to demonstrate, or I found I had to demonstrate, or to get myself that flexibility, was to demonstrate that I knew how to manage our budget, that I knew how to, frankly, save money when it came to outside counsel, to identify, frankly, where the company had historically, frankly, been very inefficient in terms of how much they were spending on outside counsel. I will say I won a lot of fans by essentially walking in a stub period of 9 months, cutting a $15 million annual spend with a particular law firm down to 7.5. That bought me some goodwill, and the board goes, well, this guy, obviously, or seems to know what he's doing. And oh, by the way, he just saved us, $7.5 million. Yeah, we'll give him a couple we'll increase his head count, and so that's one way, certainly, of demonstrating to the C-suite, that you have your arms and head around optimizing the balance between outside counsel and in-house. And let's be real. Every smart general counsel looks at his or her team being kind of that whole set of in-house plus outside counsel. It's part of a larger team, hopefully thinking about the same things, about delivering great service at as efficient rates as possible. But I think you have to, in most cases where you're not really doing what I did, I think you're going to have to demonstrate, I think, Audrey, to your point, what are the gains? Certainly, you're not going to make permanent hires for short-term needs. You're going to have to demonstrate or talk to in my case, it was always talking to the CFO or the CEO, saying, I think we can make some strategic hires that will not only add value, improve response time to the businesses, save us money in the end. These are you got to justify it. And luckily for me, I had a CEO and a CFO that understood that. But I think I kind of had to earn my cred up front before they would allow me that leeway. And so I think especially if you're a new GC, I think it's really important to demonstrate that that you know what you're doing and you have a plan that will eke out whatever, more effectiveness, greater efficiencies, what have you.
Boy, that sounds great to me. Yeah, you would have earned a lot of cred with me too. Peter, any thoughts on this topic?
I think that these are all a good kind. It's one of the hardest things is to get more resources. I mean, and one thing we do have, as you and AB have indicated, is if you can make the argument on the right metric as opposed to head count, people get it, but you say total spend, and then you can say we're going to shift dollars from outside to inside, and it's going to be less, and it's going to be more responsive to the business because that's going to be their only client. That we have that opportunity, and I think you need to make sure you're maximizing that as you play with your budget. The harder question is how to convince them, what do you need to do? It's not that someone's doing the work outside and, you can save money by bringing it inside and, okay, we're going to have a permanent head count and everything that entails. But you say, well, I'm going to pay a third of what I'm paying outside for the work. When you say we need to do something we're not doing now,
Mhm.
and making that pitch to increase either your head count internally, which is sort of what we're talking about, or even outside, that's tough. And the way one thing you can do is try to get allies within the business to support the case, whether it's we need better compliance, we need more regulatory expertise. Well, you're not selling regulatory expertise, you're selling whatever it is you're selling. We were in the chemical business or what, it's like, okay, get your business people aligned with you, that it helps them on a business basis to have quicker, more focused regulatory expertise, for example. And by increasing your hire, they can increase their sales, and they make that case with you. Makes it a whole lot easier than going in yourself and saying, I think we need another regulatory lawyer, or I think we need, a foreign compliance lawyer. If you can get the business folks, it's sometimes easier said than done, but to go with you and say, this will help us sell more or sell more faster.
Oh, that's a really great idea. I'm glad you raised that, because another metric that can be used is the time to contract. And if you can prove that it's taking 2 weeks, let's say, to do a certain kind of contract, because you have to send it out and then it has to come back or whatever, but you could cut that so that the revenue is in the door faster. That's a fabulous metric. So I really love your suggestions there. Are the things that we're talking about in terms of organizational structure relevant to the non-lawyers in the legal department, which is a term that many people don't like to use anymore? So I'll say the other professionals or the paraprofessionals in terms of how they're structured and who they report to. Peter, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And quite frankly, my experience was it's often harder to get the support to expand your non-lawyers, your paraprofessionals and administrative support, because people kind of, they're your business partners, they can get their heads around, okay, a lawyer does this, a lawyer does that, and they're like, well, why do we need all these support people? And by the way, they seem to cost a lot of money. I mean, I can get, in terms of trying to explain to them that the value of a really good paralegal is often better than the value of an okay lawyer. But trying to make that jump of, well, why do you have all, it's an easy target for your bean counters to say, well, why does the legal department have all these other stuff? We got lawyers. Why can't the lawyers? So making that case is a challenge. And of course, if you can make the case of saying, well, if I have, 2 paraprofessionals, it'll be less expensive than having 1 lawyer, and I'll get more effective work, what we need out of them, if you can make that case. But it's tough. It really can be harder than it should be to get because you can leverage paraprofessionals, particularly in a corporate environment, where they can become quite skilled at what the specifics, and maybe that's the argument you raise, is that you can take a paraprofessional who can be really skilled in the kind of contracts that your business has, or the kind of risks that your business has. And again, if you can make the argument, it'll reduce the amount of legal lawyer time. That's the way to do it. But it can be a hard sell in my experience.
AB, thoughts?
Yeah, I tell you what, through my career, I've learned the non-lawyers or the paralegals and the like, they can earn their keep, and they are vital members of any legal team. Couple thoughts. You do have to. Peter is right. Sometimes explaining that or justifying a desired hire in that area can be challenging. But if you if you essentially provide metrics demonstrating that by making these hires, the lawyers, you want the lawyers doing lawyer work. You don't want them, frankly, doing work that they shouldn't be doing. It's just not, you're not eking out the value that you could be or should be out of the lawyers. And so I think if you quantify it and qualify it that way and show that, for instance, I have these 3 lawyers, 30% of their time is done on non-lawyer, more mundane tasks that, the combination of those 3, if we hire this one person, that creates bandwidth for the professionals, and that's vitally important. I'll also add a plug for those large departments. Another key area is legal operations. That's another area where the idea is to kind of move the administrative, the business part of legal operation or legal ongoings into the hands of other than lawyers, so that lawyers can focus on doing, frankly, what you're paying them to do. So again, I give big 2 thumbs up to a crack legal operations team as well as a paraprofessional team.
Well, now you're speaking my language, of course, because that's what I transitioned into after being a GC, and often was the day when I would think, oh my goodness, how could fill in the blank, the GC or the head of this division have done this plus their kind of regular day job? The days when I'm dealing with contract administration, technology, budgeting, which if you're doing it right and you're meeting with the finance department and the business and so forth, can take a long time. It's a real discipline. So thank you for putting a plug in for legal ops. I have also used paraprofessionals in extremely productive ways. I've had them do the first go round in EEOC claims, where they gather the documents, they do the kind of routine early responses, they handle those little responses because they start to become repetitive. I've had them do definitely contracts with any kind of templating possible. I've used them even in lower cost locations overseas when any of that can be done. So I couldn't agree more that the paraprofessionals are critical. And, if the listener wanted to know who they report to, if that was part of the question, I think they report in based on their expertise or the expertise you're gonna give them. At least that's my thought at the moment. With all of this talk about structure, I'd like to spend a minute or 2, and that's kind of all we have left, on career development opportunities, as well as DE&I. And that's a broad subject matter for the time we have left. But as we're structuring our organizations, how can we help people? We know law departments tend to be flat. How can we help our people stay engaged and develop their careers in these flatter organizations that we've just described? AB?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical, and really, whether it's a legal department or finance department or whatever, I think it's incumbent upon leaders, good leaders, who want to make sure they get the most out of their colleagues, and but also to help them advance professionally and personally. I think it's critical for an employee and that person's manager to have a shared vision in terms of their professional development and personal development. The best situation I've seen, and thank God I've witnessed it, is where the company itself, as part of its really succession planning program, really integrated the important parts of professional development. It included the recruiting and retention of folks. It integrated the performance review process into succession planning, professional and leadership development, as well as was mentoring and coaching, and integrated all these kind of programs into something that frankly was fairly robust. And when you have, and most companies don't have that. Their succession planning only goes as far as maybe one deep from the C-suite. But if you have a robust succession planning thing that integrates these very individual components, I think you're structured in a way that you can have those conversations with your direct report about what they're doing, not only today and how well they're doing, but where they want to be in 3 to 5 years, or what you see. And hopefully that, again, that's a shared vision between leader and employee, and then mapping out a plan on how they're going to get that incorporates, the professional development, the leadership education, hiring executive coach, for instance, mentorship within the company outside the legal department with the business folks. Those, if you have a system like that, and I'm thinking of one company in particular where it was nice and robust like that, people knew whether they had a path going forward in the company, and it was reassuring, and that helps retention and retaining good people and making sure that they advance and that they're, frankly, happy, well, and will, hopefully stay with the company and continue to grow. So those are some thoughts on that. You're on mute, Audrey.
I agree. The opportunities are there if you spend the time to find them and map a plan, as you said. I've even done sending some lawyers to the business because they wanted to change, become business people instead of the lawyers, so to speak. Or so I've done some job rotations so that people get an experience that they otherwise wouldn't have. But it does take time. And I love your idea about mapping out a plan so it doesn't get lost, and making it part of a constant and managed development conversation. Peter, what are your thoughts on how we can deal with development in flat corporate law departments?
Yeah, I think it's critical. Be honest with you. I mean, it's really I think it's one of the most enjoyable, but it's also one of the critical parts about being a GC. And particularly in today's corporate climate where, the resources are always restricted and getting smaller, and people are double-hatted and triple-hatted in time. And what I would say is, in my experience, it's and having learned this, it's critical to be really concrete in that, you can't rely on generalities and sort of general, pronouncements. Oh, you want people? Yeah, if you can find continuing education you want to do, I fully support that, and you should do that. And people never have the time, and they don't do it. And when you have from top going down saying, oh, we want you to develop, we want to have programs, and we want to have, all of the things you want to do to develop, and you see year after year, it's the same items on their checklist. I think you have to be focused. I think you have to be realistic and concrete. So, really say, okay, there's lots of things you can do, but here's what we want to do with particular person, what they need. You're going to send them to a week-long course somewhere on either, advancing within the legal world, or even a substantive, a financial course, something concrete. It's not everything for everybody, but it's something concrete. If you're going to say, what AB said, executive coach, I've done that. Somebody needs more management presence or executive presence, and you can talk about it. You can say, I want to give you opportunities, and there's something concrete you can do. Get them an executive coach and say, here's what we're going to do concrete for you for your development. And again, not everything for everybody, but be as concrete and direct as you can for individuals, I think is what you need to do nowadays, because all the programs in the world aren't going to be effective if people don't have time to do it.
Boy, that's a great point. I heard of an organization yesterday, actually, that in order to help in this area, this one had to do with diversity in the law department, this particular conversation. They actually made it part of the job description and the performance evaluation of the leaders to be sure this was getting done, so that nobody could say, oh, I'm busy with my day job, I don't have time to do this. No, this wasn't just something on the side. This became integral to the job. And I love that you mentioned executive presence, because that is a skill that surprisingly many lawyers don't have. And I love to give people an opportunity to shine, as you said, and run projects, run task forces, get before the C-suite, but they better have that executive presence when they do that. And that coaching can be really helpful. AB, did you want to say something about this?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one point, because I was talking more with the concept of retaining good employees. I have found that it's, that the professional development of one of your charges, one of your direct reports, I tell them up front, I said, look, I'm gonna, if you want to be a GC, or you want to, whatever it is, let's, for instance, this person wants to be a GC. I said, well, fine, that's the vision, that's the shared vision. This is how we're going to invest in that. This is the plan. And oh, by the way, whether you take my position as GC or you find yourself elsewhere as a GC, that's all good. And I tell you what, it's powerful when, that resonates with individuals, and it should. I mean, they appreciate it, and they know what you're suggesting is in earnest. And, now that I'm, much older and, mostly retired, and looking back, and to see now how many people who were once, a direct report or indirectly working for me are now GCs. And that's very rewarding. And I think, so it works. I wanted to address the flat organization thing, because sometimes, the upward mobility may be very limited, but good lawyers that you want to make into great lawyers, into great executives, if they find themselves elsewhere, that's not all bad. In fact, it's darn good.
Well, thank you. And I see Bob has joined, because we're nearing the end of our session. But Peter and AB, I've learned a tremendous amount from you, and the richness of your experiences and your perspectives is unparalleled. Bob, let me turn it over to you.
So I would just echo what Audrey was saying. I mean, the three of you, and just some really sound, practical advice. Obviously, it's somewhat in a vacuum. Obviously, there's people that are participating, and you've got your unique challenges, and we're happy to do whatever we can to help support you, whether it's either of these three individuals or others on our team, helping to understand your challenge and your situation, and coming up with some practical solutions, as well as if you need to recruit talent for your team, or you're looking for some leadership development for you or others on your team, or succession planning. Those are all types of things where we can add value. So I just really like to thank AB, Peter, as well as Audrey, to take the time and spend with us today. Again, feel free to contact any of us. The one thing we'd ask for those who are participating or watching is we are going to send out just a 1-minute survey. If you could provide some feedback, that's greatly appreciated. And that really impacts how we change the program going forward. So thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join us for future GC Advantage programs. Thanks now.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.